A cold and ruthless man ties a magnificent white horse to a solitary tree in the middle of the savannah. Alone, weak, and surrounded by the sinister laughter of hungry hyenas, the horse closes its eyes, ready to accept its fate. But as the hyenas start to approach, something extraordinary happens, something that will change everything. Before we dive in, if you, like us, are animal lovers, subscribe to the channel now so you don't miss any heartwarming stories. Thanks. Let's get back to our story. The sun was setting over the Nevada desert, painting the sky with shades of orange and red that seemed to set the scattered clouds ablaze. The majestic landscape stretched as far as the eye could see, with its Joshua trees and golden grass gently swaying in the evening breeze. Amidst all this natural beauty, a solitary figure stood out, a mare as white as snow, with an elegance that seemed otherworldly. Star, as she was called, grazed peacefully in the well-manicured fields of Richard Sterling's luxurious ranch. Her silky coat shimmered in the twilight, creating a dramatic contrast with the surrounding vegetation. Every movement was graceful, as if she floated across the ground rather than simply walked. The other horses on the property, though magnificent specimens themselves, seemed ordinary compared to her ethereal presence. Sam Martinez, a young veterinarian dedicated to wildlife preservation, watched the mare from afar while conducting his fieldwork. Even focused on his notes about the behavior of the local coyote population, he couldn't help but admire Star's singular beauty. There was something different about her, something that went beyond her stunning appearance. It was as if she carried ancient wisdom in her deep, gentle eyes. "It's a shame so much beauty is in the hands of someone who only sees dollar signs," Sam muttered to himself, adjusting his binoculars to continue his wildlife observation work. He knew Richard Sterling's reputation well, the tycoon who had built an empire on questionable real estate deals in Vegas. In the main stable of the ranch, the staff moved discreetly, exchanging worried glances as they prepared the final details for the big event that would take place that night. Richard was planning a lavish party to impress international investors, and Star would be the star of the show, a living symbol of his power and wealth. "Make sure she's impeccable," Richard ordered, his authoritative voice echoing through the stable corridors. "I want everyone to see why she's considered the most valuable jewel of this property." His tone carried no trace of affection for the animal. It was purely commercial, as if he were talking about merchandise on display. Meanwhile, in the vicinity of the ranch, a pack of coyotes moved stealthily, their bright eyes reflecting the last rays of the sun. Sam watched them with fascination through his research drone, admiring the social complexity and intelligence of these often misunderstood predators. What he didn't know was that soon their paths would cross with Stars in a way that would forever change the fate of both. As night approached, an unease began to grip the environment. The animals of the desert seemed to sense that something was about to happen. The night birds began their melancholic song, and a stronger breeze stirred the tops of the Joshua trees, creating dancing shadows on the ground. Star, as if sensing the events that were to come, began to show signs of nervousness. Her ears twitched restlessly, catching every small sound, and her muscles tensed beneath her shimmering coat. One of the ranch's oldest handlers, who had developed a genuine affection for the mare, noticed her unusual behavior and tried to calm her with soft words. "Easy, girl," he whispered, stroking her neck. "It's just going to be another showcase night." But there was something in his own eyes that betrayed a deeper worry, as if he also felt that this would not be an ordinary night in the Nevada desert. The sky was almost completely dark when the first cars began to arrive at Richard Sterling's property. The moment of the great spectacle was approaching, and with it, events that would forever change the destiny of everyone involved in this story. The air was charged with expectation, and the wind whispered secrets that only the most attentive could understand. The gardens of Richard Sterling's mansion sparkled under the light of hundreds of decorative lanterns, strategically placed. The aroma of exotic flowers mingled with the expensive perfume of the guests arriving in their luxury cars. The soft music of a local orchestra floated in the air, creating an atmosphere of sophistication that Richard so cherished at his events. Star had been prepared like never before. Her white coat shone like polished porcelain. Her mane was impeccably braided with silver ribbons that shimmered with every movement. A finely crafted Italian leather halter completed her majestic appearance. She waited in a specially built enclosure near the main party area, where she would be presented at the appropriate time. "Ladies and gentlemen," Richard's voice boomed through the loudspeakers installed in the garden, "it is with great pleasure that I welcome you to my humble abode." His false modesty drew cordial smiles from the guests, all aware of the power he wielded in the Las Vegas scene. "Tonight, in addition to discussing promising investment opportunities, I would like to present something truly special." Meanwhile, in the vicinity of the property, Sam continued his fieldwork. Through the lenses of his thermal camera, he observed a group of coyotes approaching closer than usual to the boundaries of the ranch, likely attracted by the smell of the party food. "Unusual behavior," he murmured, making notes on his tablet. Back at the celebration, Richard personally led a select group of investors towards the enclosure where Star was. The mare maintained her elegant posture, but her eyes revealed a growing unease. The noise of the party, the bright lights, and the number of unfamiliar people were beginning to affect her. "This is Star," Richard announced with artificial pride. "A gift from a dear friend from Dubai. Her lineage traces back to some of the most prestigious stables in Saudi Arabia." He paused dramatically, savoring the admiration in the eyes of his guests. "She's just a small example of the treasures we can find and develop here in Nevada." A woman wearing a red evening gown approached the fence. "She's truly magnificent," she commented, reaching out to touch Star's muzzle. "I've never seen an animal so—" Her words were interrupted by a deafening crash. The fireworks started without warning, exploding in the sky in cascades of brilliant color. The sound reverberated across the property like cannon fire, amplified by the valley surrounding the ranch. For the guests, it was a dazzling spectacle. For Star, it was pure terror. In a matter of seconds, panic gripped the mare. Her eyes widened, her ears flattened against her head, and her muscles tensed with a force born of primal fear. With a piercing whinny that cut through the night, she reared violently, her front hooves striking the air. The guests recoiled in fright as Star began to thrash against the fences. The sound of the fireworks continued relentlessly, each explosion amplifying her terror. In a burst of immense strength, she broke the latch of the gate and bolted toward the party area. Tables were overturned, glasses shattered, screams of panic mingled with the chaos. Richard watched the scene with an expression that shifted from disbelief to absolute fury. His carefully planned spectacle was turning into a public nightmare. Star continued her desperate escape, galloping blindly across the property. Her mane, once perfectly groomed, now flew wildly, the silver ribbons coming loose one by one. She passed like a white blur through the stables, startling the other horses, who began to neigh in response. "Stop that mare!" Richard bellowed, his face red with rage. "Use any means necessary!" But Star had already disappeared into the darkness of the night, leaving behind only the echo of her hooves and a party in complete disarray. The moonlight bathed the Nevada desert as Richard Sterling paced back and forth in his luxurious office. The last guests had left a short while ago, leaving behind looks of embarrassment and empty promises of future contact. The sound of his Italian shoes echoed against the marble floor, marking the rhythm of his growing fury. "Have they found her?" he asked for the 10th time to the foreman, who remained in a submissive position near the door. The man, accustomed to his boss's explosive temper, simply shook his head negatively. "Incompetent," Richard exclaimed, throwing a crystal glass against the wall. The sound of the shattering glass made the foreman flinch. Through the panoramic window, the desert stretched like a dark ocean under the starry sky. Somewhere out there, Star continued her desperate escape. Richard narrowed his eyes, his mind already plotting a plan of revenge. It wasn't just the monetary value of the mare that worried him. It was his reputation, his pride wounded in front of important people. "Silence!" Richard snapped, his voice laced with venom. He turned slowly, a cruel smile forming on his lips. "Do you know what happens to animals that run into the desert at night?" He paused dramatically, savoring his employee's visible discomfort. "They meet predators." "Coyotes," Richard continued as if savoring each word, "are fascinating creatures, don't you think? Intelligent, organized, relentless, and always hungry." He walked to his massive mahogany desk, opening a drawer to retrieve a Cuban cigar. The strong aroma of tobacco soon filled the room. It would be a shame if our precious Star were to encounter a pack of them tonight. "The value," Richard laughed humorlessly as he lit the cigar. "She just cost me a lot more than her market price. Those investors—" He clenched his fists tightly. "Do you have any idea how much I lost tonight? How much she humiliated me?" Outside the office, a young maid passing by with clean towels slowed her steps as she overheard the conversation. Her heart raced as she understood what was about to happen. Maria had a special affection for Star. She was the one who often brought hidden apples to the mare. Richard continued elaborating his macabre plan. Gather some trusted men, those who know how to keep their mouths shut. He approached the foreman, blowing smoke in his face. "When you find Star, don't bring her back. Instead, make sure she is, well, exposed. There's a lone tree in the eastern sector of the property, you know it?" "Exactly," Richard smiled, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Tie her there tightly, and then—" He made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "Let nature take its course. One more thing," Richard's voice cut through the heavy silence of the office. "If anyone asks, the official story is that Star ran away and unfortunately fell victim to the natural predators of the area. A tragic accident, nothing more." He poured himself a generous dose of whiskey, raising the glass in a morbid toast. After all, these things happen in the Nevada desert, don't they? The foreman agreed silently, feeling the weight of guilt already beginning to form on his shoulders. Meanwhile, Maria crept away on tiptoe, her heart pounding and her mind working frantically on a plan to save Star. Maria ran through the night, her sandals kicking up small clouds of red dust from the desert floor. Her heart beat so hard in her chest that it seemed to want to escape. She knew the surroundings of the property well. 2 years working in Richard's mansion had taught her all the shortcuts and landmarks. The young veterinarian often set up his research camp near the dry creek bed, about 2 kilometers from the headquarters of the ranch. Maria prayed silently that he was still there, observing his precious coyotes. The full moon illuminated her path, casting ghostly shadows through the sparse trees of the desert. Sam was focused on his equipment when he heard hurried footsteps approaching. Instinctively, he reached for his high-powered flashlight, pointing the beam of light in the direction of the sound. Maria emerged from the darkness, breathless and with wide eyes of concern. Sam recognized the young maid from the mansion. He had seen her a few times during his visits to the property to check environmental permits. "Maria? What happened? It's dangerous to be out here at this hour." "Are you sure about this?" he asked, already beginning to pack up his equipment. "That's a very serious accusation." Sam checked his watch. Almost midnight. Through his monitoring cameras, he had detected intense coyote activity that night. The smell of the party food had probably drawn them closer to the property than usual. Sam frowned, his mind working quickly. The great lone Joshua tree was approximately 5 kilometers away. If Richard really planned to use that tree as the site of the sacrifice, they didn't have much time. "Maria, I need you to do something important," he said, starting his jeep. "Go back to the mansion and keep your eyes and ears open. If you find out anything more about their plans, find a way to let me know." He handed her a small walkie-talkie. "Channel 3, code green if you have news, red if there's danger." The young woman grabbed the walkie-talkie as if it were a lifeline. "Please, doctor, save her," she pleaded, her dark eyes shining with contained tears. "Star doesn't deserve an end like this." As the veterinarian disappeared into the night, Maria clutched the walkie-talkie to her chest and began her cautious return to the mansion. The warm desert wind carried the nocturnal sounds, the distant howl of coyotes, the rustling of the leaves of the Joshua trees, and somewhere the frightened whinny of a white mare running for her life. Sam drove with determination, his years of experience in the desert guiding his instincts. Through the windshield, he could see the beams of light from the other jeeps cutting through the darkness in the distance. It was a race against time, and the stakes couldn't be higher. His walkie-talkie crackled lightly. Code green. Maria's whispered voice came through the static. "They found her. They're taking her to the Joshua tree now." A tense pause, and then, "Dr. Sam, I heard that Mr. Sterling himself is going there. He wants to watch." The great Joshua tree stood solitary against the starry sky, its deep roots gripping the red soil of the Nevada desert. Its twisted branches cast dramatic shadows in the moonlight, like ghostly fingers reaching for the earth. It was a natural landmark that had served as a reference point for local residents for generations. Now, it was about to become the stage for a premeditated cruelty. Star had been captured by Richard's men after an exhausting chase. The white mare, once so majestic, now trembled, her shiny coat stained with sweat and red dust. Her eyes, large and expressive, rolled in their sockets, reflecting a deep terror as the men dragged her toward the solitary tree. "Tie her up tight," ordered the foreman, his voice betraying a slight tremor of remorse. "The boss is on his way and wants to find everything ready." He couldn't use the word prepared. It sounded too formal for something so cruel. The other three men worked in silence, avoiding looking directly into Star's pleading eyes. Thick ropes were passed around her neck and body, binding her firmly to the trunk of the Joshua tree. The mare tried to resist, but she was too exhausted after the long chase to offer more than a weak opposition. In the distance, the characteristic sound of coyotes echoed through the desert. They had already picked up Star's scent and were beginning to approach, first just a few, then in ever-increasing numbers. Their eyes gleamed in the darkness like dozens of small yellow lanterns, circling the area in an ever-closing ring. The group retreated to their jeeps, leaving Star alone under the tree. The mare whinnied softly, a sound so full of fear and pleading that made the foreman's heart clench. He had worked with horses all his life. He never imagined that one day he would participate in something so cruel. Sam drove his jeep as fast as the rough terrain allowed, guiding himself by the moonlight and his knowledge of the area. The noise of the engine frightened small animals that crossed his path. Through the walkie-talkie, Maria continued to provide updates in tense whispers. Sam clenched his teeth. He knew Richard Sterling's type well, men who confused power with the right to cause suffering, who saw animals as mere objects for their entertainment and profit. "Thank you, Maria. Stay safe." Star pulled desperately at the ropes, but Richard had been specific in his instructions. The knots were too strong to be broken. Small streaks of blood began to appear where the ropes rubbed against her delicate skin. Her whinny of despair cut through the night like a cry for help. The lights from Richard's car could already be seen approaching in the distance. He drove without haste, savoring each moment of his planned revenge. The bottle of whiskey rested on the passenger seat, along with his hunting rifle. Not that he planned to use it. Tonight, he just wanted to watch. Time seemed to drag on as two distinct races took place across the Nevada desert, one driven by cruelty, the other by compassion. Star's fate hung by an increasingly thin thread, while the stars above continued their eternal course, silent witnesses to the drama unfolding beneath their light. Richard Sterling's car stopped about 50 yards from the Joshua tree, its headlights illuminating the scene like spotlights in a macabre theater. Star, tied to the tree, cast a long shadow on the red soil of the desert. The coyotes, momentarily disturbed by the light, backed away a few steps but did not abandon their siege. The promise of an easy prey was too strong. Richard got out of the car, holding his bottle of imported whiskey, a smile of cruel satisfaction playing on his lips. The foreman and his men approached hesitantly, hats in hand, avoiding looking directly at their boss or the doomed mare. "Excellent work, gentlemen." Richard raised the bottle in an ironic toast. "Now we can appreciate the spectacle that our little rebel will provide us." He took a long swig of the whiskey, his eyes gleaming with a morbid satisfaction. "See how patient the coyotes are. They know the prey has nowhere to run." "Silence!" Richard snapped, his voice laced with venom. "You are here to obey, not to think." He took another swig from the bottle as he watched the coyotes moving in the shadows. "Besides, what we are witnessing is worth much more than the market price of this ungrateful mare." Sam, meanwhile, had turned off the headlights of his Jeep and was approaching silently from the west. Years of experience in the desert had taught him to move without drawing attention. Through his night vision binoculars, he assessed the situation. He counted at least 15 coyotes, 4 men besides Richard, and Star firmly tied to the tree. His walkie-talkie crackled softly. "Dr. Sam," Maria's voice was just a whisper, "the guards at the entrance to the ranch have been dismissed. Mr. Sterling doesn't want any witnesses." The coyotes were beginning to get bolder, approaching in an ever-closing circle. Their yellow eyes gleamed in the darkness like dozens of small, evil moons. Star trembled violently, her muscles tense beneath her sweat-soaked coat. Each movement of the predators elicited a low moan from her chest. Richard watched the scene with almost childlike pleasure. "Just look," he commented, his voice slightly slurred by alcohol. "How they work as a team. Fascinating, don't you think? First they'll tire out the prey, then—" He made a theatrical gesture with the bottle. "The grand finale." In his equipment backpack, there were some emergency flares and a small amount of meat that he used in his research. It wasn't much, but maybe it would be enough to create a distraction. The biggest problem would be Richard and his men, especially considering that the rancher was armed and obviously impaired by alcohol. One of the coyotes, probably the leader of the pack, stepped forward, approaching closer to Star. The mare whinnied in panic, pulling at the ropes with a force born of desperation. Small streaks of blood trickled down where the ropes cut into her skin. The foreman and his men exchanged uneasy glances. One of them, the youngest, seemed to be on the verge of tears, but none dared to contradict their boss. Their jobs and possibly their lives depended on that complicit silence. The full moon continued its path through the desert sky, bathing the scene with its silvery light. The warm desert wind carried the scent of fear and impending death. And in the shadows, a man prepared to defy both the laws of nature and human cruelty in the name of compassion. Sam took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment on his shoulders. Years of experience with wild animals told him that he had only one chance. If he failed, there would be no second attempt. With precise and silent movements, he began to prepare his rescue strategy. First, he removed 3 emergency flares from his backpack and positioned them strategically at different points. Then, he separated the pieces of meat he used in his research, mentally calculating the best way to use them. Finally, he checked the small first aid kit that he always carried. He knew that Star would probably need immediate care. The radio in his pocket vibrated gently. "Dr. Sam," Maria whispered, her voice trembling with concern. "I just heard Mr. Sterling ordered them to prepare his private helicopter. He intends to leave as soon as it's all over." In the clearing lit by the moon, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. The alpha coyote had approached even closer, its teeth gleaming in the dim light. 2 others followed closely behind, while the rest of the pack kept the circle closed. Star no longer whinnied. Her terror had passed the limit of sound, manifesting only in violent tremors that shook her exhausted body. Richard staggered a few steps forward, the whiskey bottle now completely empty. "Come on, my dears," he taunted the coyotes, his voice slurred by alcohol. "Show our rebel princess how royalty is treated in the desert." The sound of the gunshot cut through the night like thunder, making everyone jump. Richard had drawn his gun and fired into the air. "The next one," he said with a terrifying calm, "won't be for the sky. Understood?" It was at that moment that Sam acted. With a swift movement, he lit the first flare and threw it to the opposite side of the clearing. The intense red light exploded in the darkness, startling the coyotes and drawing their attention. Simultaneously, he tossed a few pieces of meat in the same direction. The confusion was instantaneous. The coyotes, torn between the instinct to attack and the attraction of easy food, began to scatter. Richard spun around, staggering, trying to understand what was happening. "Who's there?" he yelled, waving his gun dangerously. Sam didn't waste any time. While everyone was distracted by the first flare, he lit the second and threw it in another direction, creating more chaos. The coyotes, already naturally wary of fire, began to back away, some of them running toward the meat. "Shoot!" Richard ordered his men, but they hesitated, uncertain which direction to aim in the confusion of lights and shadows. The foreman seized the opportunity to discreetly steer the gun away from his drunken boss, pretending to support him as he stumbled. With everyone's attention focused on the flares, Sam ran to Star. The mayor, recognizing his gentle presence from the visits to the ranch, calmed down slightly. With firm but gentle hands, he began to cut the ropes that bound her, whispering words of comfort. But it was too late. The third flare exploded in the sky, bathing the entire scene in an intense red light. The remaining coyotes, definitely frightened, disappeared into the darkness. Richard's men, secretly relieved not to have to participate in a murder, feigned difficulty in orienting themselves with the lights. And there, in the middle of the chaos, Sam finally cut the last rope that held Star. The mare, although exhausted and wounded, still found the strength to rise to her full height, her white coat reflecting the light of the flares as if she herself were on fire. The night exploded in chaos. Richard, staggering and furious, screamed incoherent orders as he tried to wrest his gun back from the foreman. The flares continued to stain the desert red, creating dancing shadows that confused everyone's vision. Sam took advantage of the confusion to gently guide Star toward his jeep. "Easy, girl," he whispered, keeping a firm but gentle hand on her wounded neck. "We're getting out of here." The mare, though still trembling, followed his commands with an instinctive trust. Even exhausted and injured, she recognized the kindness in his voice. "You incompetent fools," Richard's voice cut through the night. "Don't let them escape." He finally managed to snatch his gun from the foreman's hands, but when he tried to aim, the world spun around him. The whiskey was taking its toll. Star hesitated for a moment, her large eyes reflecting the last lights of the flares. Then, as if she understood that this was her only chance of survival, she gathered her last strength and climbed into the back of the vehicle. The sound of a gunshot echoed through the desert, followed by the metallic clang of a bullet hitting the side of the Jeep. Sam threw himself into the driver's seat and turned the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life at the exact moment that Richard, now completely out of control, fired 2 more times. "Hold on, Star!" Sam yelled, slamming his foot on the accelerator. The Jeep shot across the desert, its wheels kicking up clouds of red dust. Through the rearview mirror, he could see Richard staggering toward his own vehicle, bellowing orders to his men. "We made it, Maria," he replied, keeping his eyes fixed on the rough terrain ahead. "But it's not over yet. Richard is coming after us." Star remained impressively balanced in the back, her natural instincts helping her to compensate for every bump and turn. Even wounded and exhausted, there was a new energy in her movements. The desire to survive, to escape, to freedom. The walkie-talkie crackled again. "Dr. Sam!" Maria's voice was filled with urgency. "The helicopter! They're preparing Mr. Sterling's helicopter!" A few kilometers away, there was an old abandoned property that Sam used as a secondary base for his research. The place had a large shed where he stored equipment. It would be the perfect hiding place for Star until he could provide safer transportation. The pursuing vehicles were beginning to gain ground. Sam could hear Richard's angry shouts mixing with the roar of the engines and the characteristic sound of the desert night. The moon, now partially obscured by clouds, played hide and seek, alternating moments of clarity with deep shadows. There was a moment of tense silence before the response. "Leave it to me, Doctor. I know what to do." The determination in the young maid's voice was palpable. Richard's private hangar was 200 meters from the main house. The pilot, a middle-aged man named Robert, was already making the final preparations for takeoff. Maria knew him well. He had a daughter her age and always treated her with kindness. The pilot looked up from the controls, surprised by the young woman's agitation. "Maria, what's wrong, girl? I'm in a hurry, the boss." "It's your daughter," Maria interrupted, her voice laden with studied concern. "They just called from the hospital. She's been in a car accident." Robert's face paled instantly. "My God, is she—" "She's conscious, but she's asking for you," Maria continued, silently praying for forgiveness for the lie. "You need to go now, Robert. Your family needs you." The pilot looked anxiously at the helicopter, torn between his professional duty and his fatherly love. "But Mr. Sterling—" "I'll take responsibility," Maria declared firmly. "I'll say that I told you to go myself, that I lied about the urgency. He can fire me if he wants, but you need to be with your daughter." Meanwhile, in the desert, Sam continued his skillful escape. The terrain had become rougher, with small elevations and depressions that he used to gain a few precious seconds of advantage. Star remained admirably steady in the back, even as the jeep bounced over the irregularities of the ground. "Amazing," Sam muttered to himself, impressed by the mare's resilience. Even after everything she had been through, the panic of the party, the chase, the terror of the coyotes, the cutting ropes, she still found the strength to fight for survival. The headlights of the pursuers remained visible in the rearview mirror, but the distance between them had increased slightly. Sam's knowledge of the terrain was making the difference. He knew exactly where the safest passages were, where the ground was firmer, where the trees created natural obstacles. Suddenly, the radio came to life. "Dr. Sam!" Maria's voice overflowed with contained satisfaction. "The helicopter, it's not taking off. The pilot had an urgent family emergency." Sam couldn't contain a smile. "Maria, you're incredible, but you need to get out of there now. Richard won't forgive your interference when he finds out." "Don't worry about me, Doctor. I have relatives in town. I'm already leaving the mansion." There was a brief pause. "Please take good care of Star." The sky began to show the first signs of dawn, a thin line of clarity on the eastern horizon. Sam knew they were approaching the abandoned shed. If they could get there, they would have a real chance of escaping for good. Richard's furious shout still echoed across the desert, but now there was a note of desperation in his voice. He was losing his revenge, losing his trophy, losing his power. The drink and the anger had clouded his judgment, causing him to make mistakes in the pursuit. Sam risked a quick glance at Star. In the nascent light, he could see the wounds caused by the ropes on her white coat, but he also noticed something else, an unshakable dignity, a nobility that no human cruelty had managed to destroy. "We're almost there," he said softly, knowing that she could understand him by the tone of his voice. "I won't let anything bad happen to you, I promise." The abandoned shed was already visible in the distance, its dark silhouette outlined against the clearing sky. It was a solid structure, built in a time when that region was a prosperous cattle-raising area. Now, it would serve as a sanctuary for a courageous mare, and everyone who had risked everything to save her. The abandoned shed emerged from the shadows like a sleeping giant, its aged metal walls reflecting the first rays of the rising sun. Sam guided the jeep directly to the main entrance, where large metal doors awaited ajar. The interior of the building was a large space, filled with shadows and equipment covered by dusty tarpaulins. "Come on, Star," he whispered, stopping the vehicle and rushing to help her down. The mare moved carefully, her muscles trembling with exhaustion. Even so, there was a natural grace in her movements, a resilience that overcame pain and fatigue. Sam worked quickly, guiding Star to a more secluded corner of the shed, where he had prepared a space with fresh hay and clean water during his previous research. The sound of the pursuing vehicles approached, echoing across the desert. "Stay here," he instructed gently, stroking Star's injured neck. "I need to make things a little difficult for our friends out there." With precise and rapid movements, Sam began to implement his defense plan. First, he closed the heavy metal doors, locking them with an iron bar. Then, he strategically positioned some of the abandoned equipment, creating a maze of obstacles that would hinder the entry of any invader. The headlights of the pursuers illuminated the slits in the doors, and soon Richard's furious shouts could be heard clearly. "Open this immediately!" he bellowed, his voice slurred by drink and rage. "I'll break down these doors." Sam used the few minutes that his improvised defenses would give him to care for Star's injuries. With gentle and experienced gestures, he began to clean the cuts caused by the ropes, applying an antiseptic from his first aid kit. "You were very brave," he murmured as he worked, keeping his voice calm despite the approaching chaos. "Now I need you to trust me one more time." Outside, the sound of metal hitting against metal indicated that Richard's men were trying to force the doors. Sam knew that they would not resist for long. His radio crackled softly. It was Maria. "Dr. Sam," she whispered, "I just arrived in town. The environmental police are on their way, but it will take at least an hour." "Thank you, Maria," he replied, his voice conveying sincere gratitude. "You've already done more than enough. Stay safe now." A particularly loud crash made Star jump. Sam turned his attention to her, noticing how her large eyes reflected fear, but also a growing trust in his presence. "You have nowhere to go!" Richard's voice thundered. "That mare is my property! You are committing a crime!" Sam couldn't contain an ironic smile. Crime? The real crime had been what Richard had planned to do with Star. But now was not the time for reflection. He needed to focus on keeping both of them alive until the reinforcements arrived. The sky outside continued to clear, its shades of pink and orange visible through the upper slits of the shed. The desert awoke to another day, oblivious to the drama unfolding in its bosom. Birds began their morning songs, creating a surreal soundtrack for the impending confrontation. Adaptações menores também foram realizadas para melhorar o fluxo e o ritmo da narrativa em inglês. Sam quickly checked his cell phone. No signal. They were truly alone there, he and Star, united by destiny and the determination to survive. The blows on the doors intensified, and small splinters of metal began to fly. A ray of sunlight penetrated through a crack in the roof, illuminating Star like a natural spotlight. Her white coat, even stained and wounded, shone with an ethereal luminosity. For a moment, Sam was paralyzed by the sight. It was as if all the beauty and dignity of the natural world were concentrated in that courageous mare. The doors of the shed finally gave way with a metallic crash that echoed through the empty space. The light of dawn flooded the environment in golden beams, revealing the dust that danced in the air. Richard staggered inside, his disheveled figure outlined against the growing clarity. His eyes, bloodshot from drink and fury, scanned the shadows. "I know you're here," he shouted, his voice hoarse from yelling. "Come out now and maybe I'll be merciful." The foreman and two other men followed him hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Mr. Sterling," the foreman ventured to speak, "maybe we should wait. The police." The men began to move reluctantly through the shed, pushing aside tarpaulins and circumventing equipment. Sam could hear their footsteps approaching, the sound of their boots against the concrete floor, mixing with Star's heavy breathing. Richard staggered to a pile of old crates, knocking them down with a violent kick. "Worse! Worse!" His voice was full of scorn. "That two-bit vet thinks he can humiliate me? Steal what's mine." With extreme care, he began to guide Star in that direction, moving silently between the shadows. Each step was calculated, each movement measured to avoid any noise that could betray their position. The momentary chaos gave Sam the opportunity he needed. With a swift movement, he opened the side door, revealing the growing light of morning. "Now, Star," he whispered urgently. "No one leaves here," Richard shouted, his gun trembling in his unsteady hands. "That mare is my property, and I'm going to get her back even if I have to kill someone to do it." The two men grappled, fighting for control of the gun. Sam took advantage of the distraction to run toward the door, but a second shot made him stop in his tracks. The sound of the shot was followed by a cry of pain. The sunlight now completely flooded the shed through the open door. Outside, Star waited, her white silhouette shining against the morning sky like a restless ghost. Sam was trapped between her and an armed man who had completely lost his mind. Time seemed frozen inside the shed. The foreman groaned softly, his blood staining the concrete floor. The other two men had retreated to the corners, their faces pale with fear. Richard kept his gun pointed at Sam, but his eyes constantly diverted to the open door, where Star remained as an ethereal vision against the morning light. "You know what the most annoying part of all this is?" Richard said, his voice taking on an almost contemplative tone. "It's not losing the mare. It's not even the humiliation." He took a step forward, staggering slightly. "It's that you really think you're doing the right thing, don't you?" Sam remained silent, his mind working frantically in search of a way out. The foreman's injury didn't seem fatal, but the man needed urgent medical attention. Outside, Star whinnied softly, as if calling for him. "You and that meddling little maid," Richard continued, his voice growing more bitter with each word, "thinking you can teach me a lesson about morality, that you can make me look like the villain." He laughed, a harsh and humorless sound. "Do you know how many jobs I create? How many families depend on me?" The answer seemed to enrage Richard even more. "Cruelty? You don't know anything about cruelty." He gestured violently with the gun. "I built an empire from nothing. I had to be tough. I had to make difficult decisions. And now, because of a stupid horse—" "No!" he shouted, now truly desperate. "I'm not going to lose everything because of this." With a quick movement, he aimed the gun toward the open door, where Star still waited. "If I can't have her, no one else will." What happened next seemed to occur in slow motion. Sam threw himself against Richard at the exact moment that the shot fired. The bullet missed Star by inches, hitting the metal structure of the shed with a resounding thud. The two men fell to the ground, wrestling for control of the gun. Star, startled by the shot, galloped into the shed instead of fleeing. Her hooves pounded against the concrete in a thunderous rhythm as she circled the space, whinnying in panic. The other men threw themselves to the sides, trying to escape the path of the terrified animal. Richard managed to push Sam away and got up staggering, still holding the gun. But before he could aim again, Star ran past him, one of her hooves accidentally hitting his hand. The gun flew through the air, sliding across the floor until it stopped near the entrance. The sirens were closer now. Sam took the opportunity to approach Star, who had stopped her frantic gallop and was now trembling violently. "Easy, girl," he whispered, touching her neck gently. "It's over." Richard, still on his knees holding his injured hand, looked up and, for a brief moment, seemed to see the scene as it really was. Not a matter of property or pride, but a testament to the beauty and dignity that he had tried to destroy. The environmental police vehicles arrived in a cloud of red dust, their sirens breaking the silence of the morning desert. Maria was with them, having guided the authorities to the abandoned shed. Her face showed signs of a sleepless night, but her eyes gleamed with determination. Richard, still kneeling and holding his injured hand, let out a bitter laugh. "So the little maid brought reinforcements," he muttered, casting a venomous look toward the door. "It doesn't matter. My lawyers—" As if to confirm his words, one of the officers entered carrying a tablet. On the screen, video images clearly showed Richard and his men tying Star to the lone Joshua tree, leaving her at the mercy of the coyotes. Sam's research drone had captured everything. The drone had all the necessary authorizations for environmental research. A policewoman replied dryly, handcuffing him carefully not to worsen the injury to his hand. And it captured evidence of environmental crime and animal cruelty in flagrante delicto. Maria entered timidly into the shed, her eyes immediately finding Star. The mayor, recognizing the young woman who always brought her hidden apples, whinnied softly. "Oh, my beautiful," Maria whispered, approaching with tears in her eyes. "You're hurt." The officers began to collect statements and evidence. Richard was taken to a patrol car, still protesting and threatening to sue everyone involved. His men, visibly relieved that it was all over, cooperated fully with the authorities. Sam exchanged a meaningful look with Maria before answering. "I know a rescued animal sanctuary a few hours from here. They have experience with traumatized horses and enough space for her to recover properly." The sun was already high in the sky, transforming the shed into a kaleidoscope of light and shadows. Outside, the Nevada desert continued its eternal cycle, indifferent to the drama that had just unfolded. Birds sang, announcing the new day, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of Joshua trees in bloom. Star, as if sensing that the danger had really passed, rested her muzzle delicately on Sam's shoulder. Her eyes, once full of fear, now conveyed a deep peace. It was as if she knew that finally she was truly safe. 6 months had passed since that dramatic night in the Nevada desert. The Sanctuary of Hope, located in a verdant valley a few hours from Richard's old property, had become Star's new home. The place, with its extensive fields and modern facilities, provided the perfect environment for her recovery. On that Sunday morning, Sam watched with satisfaction as Maria led Star on a peaceful walk through the sanctuary fields. The young woman, who now worked officially as a volunteer on weekends, had developed a special connection with the mayor. The two seemed to communicate in their own language, made up of subtle gestures and understanding glances. "It's amazing how she's changed," commented Helen, the veterinarian in charge of the sanctuary, approaching Sam. "When you brought her, she barely let anyone come near her. Now look at her." Star had truly transformed. Her white coat, now completely recovered, shone with health under the morning sun. The scars from the ropes were still visible to attentive eyes, but they had become marks of her strength, not her pain. She walked with a serene confidence, as if she had finally found her place in the world. "The news about Richard came in today," Helen continued, her voice more serious. "The court accepted the settlement. He's going to pay a significant fine, which will be diverted to animal protection projects, and he's prohibited from owning any kind of livestock for the next 10 years. Maria returned with Star, her face radiant with happiness. "Dr. Sam, she's more confident every day. Today she even let me braid her mane." The young woman stroked the mare's neck affectionately. "Didn't you, my beautiful?" "The foreman called yesterday," Sam commented, offering an apple to Star. "After he recovered from his injury, he decided to open his own business. He's raising horses in a more humane way, offering riding lessons for children." A group of visitors approached, part of the educational program that the sanctuary had implemented. They were mainly children from local schools, come to learn about respect for animals and the importance of preservation. While the veterinarian told the story to the fascinated children, Sam walked away a little, observing the scene with a full heart. The morning sun bathed the valley in a golden light, making Star's coat shine like freshly fallen snow. In the background, the desert stretched majestic, reminding them that nature always finds a way to heal its wounds. Maria joined him, also watching the scene. "You know, Dr. Sam," she said softly. Sometimes I think that we didn't just save Star that night. Somehow, she also saved us. Star raised her head, her eyes meeting Sam's across the distance. In that look there was a deep wisdom, an understanding that transcended the barriers between species. It was a look that spoke of gratitude, of restored trust, and above all, of freedom. Not just physical, but the true freedom that comes when one is loved and respected for who one is.